Welcome to the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. My name's Whitney Dangerfield. I know a lot of you here, but not everyone. I'm the publications director here. I always sit in this chair and I can't touch the floor, so I'm like straight like elementary school. But so I just want to introduce our guest. John Hendrickson is a senior editor at The Atlantic and the author of Life on Delay, Making Peace with the Stutter. He wrote the Atlantic feature, What Biden Can't Bring Himself to Say, which was named one of the best stories of 2019 by Longform. His book is an outgrowth of that article. In addition to The Atlantic, he's written and edited for Esquire, Rolling Stone, and the Denver Post. Jonathan Segal is a vice president and executive editor at Alfred A. Knopf. 7 of the books he's published have won Pulitzer Prizes. He has an amazing roster of writers. In addition to being John's editor, he is also the editor of books by NYU's Ted Conover and Brooke Kroger. So we're going to talk a little bit up here, and then we're going to open it up to questions. There's a microphone right there, so when it's time for questions, we will let you know, and you would come up to the microphone. And I also wanted to point out that NYU Bookstore is here with John's book, so you can purchase his book, and he'll be signing the book over there. So, John, I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you for having us here tonight. Thanks to everybody who came out on cold Monday night. Appreciate it big time. Typically at these book events, the author reads a chapter in the beginning. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to keep us here till midnight tonight. My editor, John, is graciously offered to read a passage, and then three of us will chat.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the clumsy entry. The look is almost always the same. It's the moment the listener realizes something is wrong with you. That moment, they subtly wince. They don't know whether to interject or to keep waiting while you try and fail to speak. They probably don't sense their shoulders rising and their head pulling away in discomfort. It's primal, this reaction. Another body literally retreating from you, the problem. Even during the chaos of a stutter, you see it, all of it. The judgment, the pity, the why does he talk like this expression. No matter how many years pass, no matter how numb you become, the look never leaves you. I've received the look from parents, priests, school teachers, bosses, friends, and girlfriends. The look stalked playgrounds when I was young, and it was waiting for me behind the bar when I got older. Flight attendants and baristas and counter guys at the pizza place near my apartment throw me the look. I get it from colleagues and neighbors and strangers at birthday parties. I don't blame them. You may have given someone the look yourself, and I don't blame you. Odds are that you are part of the 99% of the population who don't stutter. But if you're among the 1% of people in the world who do, then I don't need to explain the look to you. Someone gave you the look earlier this morning. Someone else will give you the look before you go to bed tonight. The look is one reason people who stutter look away.
Just out of curiosity, are there any other people who stutter in the audience here? In the past week, could you raise your hand if you've gotten that look? Oh. I didn't write that passage to bum us all out. I didn't write it to make anybody feel bad, but I just wrote it because it happens every day and because it's authentic. And one of the main things John and I were constantly working on with this book is just to be as real as possible. Not a Hallmark movie, not just a bunch of depressing tiny anecdotes, but just real. And so, thank you very much, Sean, for reading that.
Thank you. It's a great way to begin. So a lot of people in this audience are journalism students, so we are going to talk some about structure and how this all came about. But, you know, John and I, full disclosure, John and I worked together at the Atlantic, so I knew him somewhat. But, you know, I just was so taken with this book. It's so intimate and beautiful and well-written. And it spoke to me on so many levels as a writer and an editor and advisor to students, but also as a parent and as a child myself and a sibling. I was just wanted to sort of go back to the beginning a little bit, not to the beginning of your life, but the beginning of how this all started. In the book, you said you'd never really written about stuttering before. And you said that when you started at the Atlantic, Denise Wills, who's an executive editor at the Atlantic, asked if you have any ideas for articles, which sounds, I know, to journalism students here like a dream. And you told her you wanted to write about Biden's stutter. And I'm curious if you plan to be a part of that story. I mean, I assumed that you were going to be, but I just wondered how, if you became more of that story as it went on and as Biden started like saying that he wouldn't fully commit that he still stutters. How did that come about?
Great question. When I had that first meeting at the Atlanta with a bunch of editors, Denise asked me, do you have any evergreen ideas about the election? So if people are journalism majors, you know evergreen just means timeless, you know, not pegged to a tiny little part of the campaign. And I tossed out this idea, and I didn't think it would get approved. I didn't think it would become an assignment. It took months for Biden's people to agree to let me talk to him. It took many phone calls and tons of email follow-ups, and then they finally gave me an hour with him, and I was close to him, just like this. And I walked into that thinking I would get this big reveal. I thought at some point he would say, yes, I still am a person who stutters. But the minutes are going by, 30 minutes, 35, 45 minutes, and he isn't saying it. And then it dawns on me like, this isn't happening. He's not going to say it. So I left his office that day mad, mad at myself. And I thought that the Atlantic had trusted me to get this article, get the interview, and I failed. And I was mad for about a week. But I got back up here and I had a conversation with my editor who asked me, why doesn't he want to talk about it? And that changed everything with this, with the article, and then it became a more interesting article at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the personal part is what struck such a chord, too. I mean, and then, you know, when your article did come out, you got an incredible reaction. So I don't know if people remember this, but it went viral. It was #1 on the Atlantic's most read list for a long time. You were on TV, and you heard from a ton of people. And so, you know, you hear about people being like, oh, this article went viral, and then I got my book. But there's like a lot that happens in between those two last sentences. And, you know, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how it went from an article to an accepted book proposal. And I know you two had a special relationship too. So I'd like for you both to talk about that if you can. So whoever would like to take it first.
Yeah. That article, it was the first time I had ever written anything about my stutter, the topic of stuttering. It was the first time I had ever even broached the topic with friends, family, colleagues. You know, I was always just walking around with, like, the worst kept secret. And right after it was published, and as you said, it went viral unexpectedly. Multiple literary agents and book editors kind of came at me at the same time, and they're like you need to turn around a proposal in 2 weeks. You got to get it. You got to do it. You got to jump on this. You got to do it. And they're saying, I'll get you all this money, and it was just like gross. It was horribly gross. It was like used car salesman, or like Better Call Saul or something, you know, like it was horrible. I ended up agreeing to work with an agent who was the opposite of all that. Totally opposite in every way. And I told her, you know, I've never even thought about doing a book. I don't know if that's the thing I'm even ready for. I need a lot of time. And so it was around Thanksgiving that my article came out, but I didn't even have a book proposal till late May. And I took a lot of time in that to craft it. And in that whole time, off and on, I was talking with John about it. And John is a person who I've known my entire life because John has worked with my dad on books. And that fact by itself made me wary of like partnering up with John, just because I'm, you know, angsty teenager at heart. I'm like, I'm not doing that. You work with my dad. I'm not going over there, you know. And I had that a lot. I had that. That was a real thing that I was talking to my wife about. I'm like, I can't work with you. I can't work with John. He works with my dad. I can't do it. I eventually had that conversation with John, and John said, I can help you figure out the toughest parts of this book, the personal parts, better than any other editor can in America, because I've known you your whole life, and I know your family and all that. And thankfully, I listened, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, John, what did you see in this that you were like, this is totally a book?
Well, you know, I knew John growing up, and what I didn't know was what was behind the veneer of what it meant to stutter. I didn't know the inner story. I didn't know the complications. And when I read the proposal, I realized that a whole world was about to open for me. And if it opened for me, it could open for a lot of other people. And I love that idea. I love that idea. And I also wanted, and I just knew in my bones from what John had written. You know, you learn so much from a lead of a story. And I think it's when you were in Denver or someplace, I read a lead of your story that went on about 8 lines. And it was like, I shook my head and I said, when I was his age, I couldn't even think of writing a lead like that. It had all the essential information to get you hooked on a story, beautifully written. And I just knew that talent was there. And when the proposal came in, writing a proposal is a hell of a lot different from writing a book or a piece or long form, short form. But proposals are roadmaps. And I saw in this roadmap the ability to help a hell of a lot of people and to educate a hell of a lot of people. And I felt that I could be a special help because I knew some of the dynamics in the family, which, you know, you can read for yourself about those. But I just was, you know, sometimes when I get a proposal, the first paragraph tells me I'm not going to be interested in this book because either the level of writing is off or it's clumsy or it's not clear or whatever. I knew from the first sentence of his proposal that I wanted to buy the book.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, like in general? Like you're saying the beginning of the proposal you can sort of tell. For someone who you haven't known your whole life or his whole life, like what are you looking for? Like what is that thing? Because you're saying the things that you knew wouldn't work, but I'm curious about what does work, like when you know you have a good proposal.
Well, I was encouraged. I worked for Sonny Mehta for about 35 years at Knopf, and he was one of the great publishers of our time, also one of the nicest and most civilized men. I think about him every day of my life. And when I came to Knopf, we were sitting in a French restaurant smoking cigarettes, that's how long ago it was, and drinking. And he said he wanted me to come to Knopf. And I said, what do you want me to do? What niche do you want me to fill? What particular role? And he said, I want you to do the books that you think are important. I want you to find the writers that speak to you, because if they speak to you, as a reader, you're a passionate reader, the odds are they're going to speak to a lot of other people. And I've always followed that advice. You know, when I look at a proposal, I don't say to myself, somebody at HarperCollins or Farrar Straus or some other publishing house is going to buy this book, I better be interested in it. or I don't look at a proposal from a letter that accompanies the proposal, a letter from an agent who compares the book to, War and Peace, and, I don't pay attention to that. I follow my instincts, and I think most editors, not every editor, certainly, there are some editors who are on the lookout for commercial novels, and it has to have certain components. Some editors do romance books, and they have to have certain components. But it comes to nonfiction, which is what I do primarily. Following your own instincts has always been the best advice I ever got. It has to do with the writing, of course. I mean, a proposal is a way of putting, it's your memo of introduction. And if it's clumsily written or poorly crafted, that sends a message that even though you might have a lot of knowledge in the subject, you may not be the person that I can work with.
Can I ask you something? So this is about a disability that only 1% of the population has. Did that make it a tougher sell when you take it upstairs, be like, can we buy this?
It did not make it a tougher sell, and I think in all publishing houses the enthusiasm starts with the editor. Obviously, that's the entry point for any writer to come into the house. And I didn't hesitate for a minute because I knew this book would take me to a place I'd never been. And those, I think, are some of the best books we can ever publish. I didn't know what the world of a stutterer was like. I didn't know the hardships, the difficulties, the shame you feel or whatever it was. And the idea that we could open up this kind of closed box that so few of us who don't stutter don't know about, if we don't have a relative who does, if we don't have a friend who does, we don't know that world. And the idea of going to a place I've never been, I'm a sucker for that kind of book because I think those are so incredibly valuable. It can sometimes be a place, a physical place. Ted Conover takes us to places that are physically far away from us and not out of our experience. And those are great places to open up life for us. But the human experience of someone, I did a book on dyslexia once, which, same rationale.
I hope the journalism students are taking notes here. One thing, and we talked about this in the back a little bit, but John, sometimes whenever we would get pitches at the Atlantic, I would think, oh man, this person is really, this could be a book, and it's not really an article. And I'm assuming that you sometimes get book proposals that you're like, this is actually a long-form journalism piece. And I wondered if you could both talk about that a little bit. How do you know that? And what can students take from that too?
My article about Joe Biden's lifelong journey as a person who stutters, that was published at just over 6,000 words. This is a pretty small book. This is 240 pages. It's not this 500-page book, but it's 74,000 words. And so at the time of that article in The Atlantic, that was the longest thing I'd ever written. And that felt like a book at the time I was doing it. To even imagine doing something that would be, well, I can't do the math. Liz, how much is that? 12 times as long. I couldn't even imagine it. One answer to the question is that it can't be one tiny thing. Like, this is also a book about music. It's about friendships. It's about family. It's a coming of age. It's about road trips. It's about tons of other topics. But it's all told through the prism of being a person who stutters. And I think getting that altitude correct is important and hard and takes revision, and it takes time.
I think Sonny Mehta, he got an award, I forget, from Penn, I think it was. And he said, at the end of my life, I don't want to be remembered as an editor or a publisher. I want to be remembered as a reader. And, as many things that Sonny said, I've never forgotten that. The key, long form, short form, any form, books, is you've got to, you read, you value the importance of reading, you know how messages get conveyed, you learn how emotion gets conveyed, you get smarter and smarter. I always describe my job as a form of continuing education. I sign up books on subjects I know very little about, and at the end of the process, I think I'm a little bit wiser. But in any of the forms, what I think is so important is to develop this notion of compression. John has talked about it at another venue. He talked about, because it's sometimes difficult to form a sentence, he learns how to make short sentences, and yet they contain a lot of information, and in this case, a lot of emotion. When you read Life on Delay, you'll see how that compression makes him a better writer. And sometimes when I look at a proposal that goes on for 40 pages, and after the third page, I keep saying to myself, yes, I know that already, I know that already, I know that already. You're in trouble. Everything you write has a sort of a natural length built into it. Either it fascinates you big time or it fascinates you small time. Either you find the subject is only worth, digging into at one level or another level. But the key for me is not every writer, starting to generalize makes no sense, but so many writers became really good writers because they read so much and they continued to read. And that's such a key in the profession, no?
It's also, I just wrote the book I wanted to read. And John told me that at the outset, too. He said, I want you to write the book you want to write, and I want you to write a book that you'll feel good about 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Other editors, other publishers were kind of pushing me toward more biology, all these other things that I'm bad at. And I'm like, I can't do that. Yeah.
You know that line about everybody has a book in him? Most of them would be pretty bad. You know?
I wanted to read a little part of your book for a second and ask you a question about it. You, in a conversation, let me see. I need 3 hands. In a conversation you had with your professor at Penn State, Paul Kellerman, you had said to him that I want part of my book to be about people versus characters. In the narrative of our lives, people are characters, and they're good characters or bad characters, but the reality is that they're multidimensional, nuanced people, and a lot of their choices and decisions are totally independent of our lives. And then to which he replied, I think I've probably told you this, but what you write about something, that's to cleanse your memory. So bear that in mind, which I loved that part too. But on the idea of the narrative of our lives versus the reality of our lives, I felt like I think people aspire to that, but it's hard to get that into a book. And so I just wondered, how did you think about, how did you approach this book and your interviews to capture that nuance? And what did you think about when you were writing? Because I think that, that can be hard. It can be, you start, once you tell yourself a story, it starts to become a story and not reality in some ways.
Exactly. And the big question that you always have to return to if you're writing a book or magazine article, anything, is does X detail drive the story forward? There are plenty of things that happened in my life that don't appear in the book at all, just because it didn't drive it forward. My patient wife would read the manuscript in progress basically every day, and there were certain days in which she'd read it and just kind of be like, just go, and be like, I don't think you need this, And it was just like it happened in my life, but is it worthy of appearing in a book? So I think always reinforcing that high threshold of inclusion, and that applies with articles too. If you're including a detail or a quote, it has to animate that character. It has to personify that. It can't just be, I took a sip of water. It's like, okay, did I take it because I'm terrified up here and I'm hot and like beads of sweat, and I am. But is it interesting enough to include? Maybe that's in a early draft and then comes out in later draft. It's just a constant calibration.
I mean, we are in a spotlight up here, it feels like. Well, I just thought you just achieved that balance so well, and I was thinking, yeah, I mean, I think some of this is just because you're a wonderful writer, and some of it's because you were really trying to achieve that, and I think the two of those things came together so well. Another thing I wanted to ask, so in the acknowledgments, I read the acknowledgments, and John, you wrote that John, quote, gracefully guided me as I struggled with the most challenging material in this book. And I was like, I want to hear that guidance. And I just wanted you guys to talk a little bit about the process, like that you're going to your editor, and like what kind of things are you talking about as you're writing and working through the book, and things that you learned from John, or maybe the two of you.
Well, John's been in this business for 50 years? Half a century? Is that right?
I didn't fall down when I started. I had no problem getting up on stage.
Well, John brings this perspective of longevity. And I mentioned this earlier, but John told me it's important to publish a book, one that actually exists between hardcovers. It's important that you be proud of that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I think people who write memoirs or anything personal don't always get advice like that. I think there's often a capitalist market incentive to do a juicy, gossipy memoir, and I didn't want that, and John helped with that a lot.
Yeah, I think what I said in part is that I want your truth. I wanted what you felt most cleanly expressed in the best possible words that you could find. That I wanted you to follow the tangents and the ideas that interested you. It's an extension, I try to find the books that interest me. I wanted you to find the things between the pages of the book that interested you, and not to put things in there because they were supposedly obligatory or that you had to go into deep science. So that I wanted your truth. I wanted your voice. I wanted your emotion. And I wanted what mattered most to you. And I think that, I've been around a long time, that's true. But, there are certain things that never change. There are people who have an ability to get to the point in a hurry. There are people who have curiosity. If you don't have curiosity, it's hard to write a nonfiction book. People who want to get to the truth of things, that have a skepticism about them, that maybe what we've been told in the past isn't exactly the truth. The need to do good reporting or research, whatever you call it. There are certain sine qua nons that you can't not have in a book. And when they're missing, because writers are sometimes too close to their work, all I do is to say, gee, this would be interesting, or that would be interesting, or, you've said that once before. I mean, all it is common sense, but the basic ingredients of books have been the same for a long time. And that hasn't changed. Nonfiction books are in a sort of a funny place right now. Their sales have gone way, way down over the last 15, 20 years, and we're trying to figure out why. Whereas fiction has really risen, not exponentially, but, more and more of dollars that are flowing into publishing companies are coming out of fiction. And, I'm sort of fascinated as to why, but some part of it may be escapism, But if you look at the bookstore that you go to every day, there are still 50, 100 good books coming out every month or a couple of months, and they all have a lot of the same things in common: compression, curiosity, research, etc.
We're running into time to have questions, but I just want to ask a couple more. I felt like one of the threads of this book was the story of magazine journalism. And, you've worked at amazing places. You've also been laid off from them. And, I was wondering, there are some magazine students here and a lot of people a lot of journalism students here. And I was just wondering what advice do you have for students who are moving into, trying to move into magazine journalism now? And then I have a similar question for you.
I've had exactly 5 jobs at good places, at places that people would kill to work at, and I'm grateful every single day. Prior to working at the Atlantic with you, I worked at Rolling Stone, Esquire. I have not gotten about 300 jobs. I'm not exaggerating. Like, if I had to guess, probably 3. I've gotten 5. I've not gotten about 300. One of the jobs I didn't get was at the Village Voice, which isn't there anymore, doesn't exist anymore. But I remember walking in, just is it over there or there, and thinking like, oh my God, this is it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get this job. This is it. And then I did not get it. And that happened like over and over and over again. And Condé Nast, GQ, Vanity Fair, just kept happening over and over again. And then I ended up at some good places, and I was laid off 2 times. And then even with full-time jobs at these places, I was not living the Cameron Crowe, almost famous Rolling Stone. It was working in an office that looked like Dunder Mifflin. And it was getting articles up on the web, and something happens in the news. We need a story on it, editing, writing, posting, half a dozen things a day. All of that, it's a reality of our business and all the economics of our business. But I think the people that have figured it out are the people who do that every day, all day, churn, in your 20s, I'm talking about. And then pitch actual magazine articles on top of that. Pitch long-form articles on top of that. And you report and you write those articles on your weekends and at bedtime at night. And then you maybe get a good one, and then it opens up the doors, and then you have other assignments. And then you do enough of those, and then maybe your job changes, and then you're focusing only on those. But it's like at least a decade of just working constantly across all different word counts.
Years ago, there was a sports writer who won at least one Pulitzer. He was a great writer who happened to be writing about sports. That's the way Gay Talese started. A lot of people, when I was getting in the business, that's the way they started. And Red Smith had this great line. He said, writing is easy. All you'll have to do is open up a vein every day. Right? But it's... I didn't go to grad school. I wish I had. I was desperate to get to the New York Times, and it's the only thing that was in my head. I wanted to be there. And when I got there as a kid, as a copy boy, I took home $43 a week. Shows you how old I am. And we used to do everything in hot type. Everything was in galley form. You know, you did your manuscript, it would be edited. And behind the editor's desk, there was a spike, literally a spike sticking out of the wall. And at each stage of the process, from the original manuscript to the first revision, the second revision, and then the long galleys and the revised galleys, each stage as it was completed would be put on this spike so that you could always go and look back, oh, maybe we should restore this sentence, did I misspell something, whatever. So you always had this, they were called barnacles, was the sort of slang for them. And then when a story ran in the magazine, I used to go around and I would take the barnacles from off the spike and I would look what editors had done to each stage of the manuscript. And that was my own form of graduate school. And what spoke to me, what I learned most from what they did was this concentration and precision of mind. Even things that seemed obvious to maybe 50% of the people who were readers, you had to push the writer to be more precise. You had to keep pushing and pushing, even to the point of pedantry. But the lesson in that is that you gotta want it. I mean, I have been through books. How many revisions? I think just one, right? On your book was one revision, basically.
Yeah, and then it goes through the copy edits, it goes through other, but in terms of actual like substantive textual edits, we just did one. I think that's because I had edited it myself like 100 times, just being an editor and being a web journalist in which everything is DIY.
Yeah, no, I mean, this book was close to ready to go when it was written. You know, certain things got a little bit better, but I've been through 4 drafts. I just finished working on a book on the history of Germany, and it took 5 drafts, and it was 700 pages long. And believe me, I didn't want to. But you get the discipline early, and I'm sure that's part of, you know, why going to grad school is so great, is that, you know, you get the discipline early, that if you have to force yourself to concentrate, you have to force yourself to make priorities, but you have to put yourself, it's almost like an actor putting in himself or herself into a role on stage. You have to put yourself as an editor into the head of the writer. You know, what is the writer trying to accomplish? How can I help them? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses? And the fact that I knew John as well as I did helped me so much in shortening that process. When you're working with a new writer, you know, there are other signals, as I said, the proposal and compression and the interesting nature of a subject or whatever, but one thing that never goes away, if you learn how to write, there's so many things that you can do with that. You know, not everybody is going to be a novelist, and not everybody is going to get a job at the Atlantic, although I wish I had one. The thing that never goes away is when you learn how to write, there are so many publications that are published, whether they're medical journals or whether they're analyses of fiscal crises or whatever. That incredible skill of clearly presenting information is just invaluable.